I don't even have the face of the persecutor. None of the families of the victims ever seen him. Hi guys, welcome to Sunday in Russia. I hope you're doing well. Here I talk about ordinary people from Russia. If you're new, then a special welcome. I grew up in Russia. And even though a lot of people get confused, how come I, as a hijabi, speak Russian? Well, I'm a native Russian speaker. I lived in Russia my entire life. So I know the culture and the system like the back of my hand. About 3 weeks ago, I had to fly to another state for a funeral. It was a quick trip, just 2 days, and an hour before my flight home, I went to the grave one last time to say a final prayer. The ground around the grave was soft and heavy underfoot because it rained the night before. At the airport, while going through the TSA, I got stopped. At first, I thought, oh, maybe there's an issue with my bag. But the agent looked at me, then asked me to come forward closer to him and said, oh, I see why you got a second basket. He placed one of those calibration boxes over my shoes and said, your shoes are nasty. Confused and hurt, I wanted to say something, but I hesitated. I was worried that my response in that moment would be disappropriate, that I would make myself look aggressive. And I didn't want this, especially since I look the way I look. After all, the tissues I've had were used the day before, wiping tears, not mud. When I talked to my therapist later, she said staying silent was the right thing to do. And I've been sitting with that ever since. Why is silence seen as strength? Because if I said something, would I risk confirming what people and authorities already think about Muslims? Is that why? You know, people love to say Muslims are violent. We've seen it in the past year alone here in the United States, when pro-Palestinian protesters are labeled as violent and undemocratic by the fellow Americans, especially conservatives, who, let's be real, aren't exactly the poster child for calm and rational protests. Unless, of course, storming government buildings now counts as a peaceful pastime. So, to say that Muslims can't handle things peacefully is the biggest lie of the 21st century. Because, let's be factual here, and it might hurt some feelings, the idea of collective decision-making, fairness, and respect for everyone's voice didn't start in the West. The world is far older than Americans' 240 years, and indigenous communities across the globe have been practicing democracy for centuries, including Muslim indigenous communities. One such indigenous community, the Ingush people, is the focus of today's video. For generations, they've gathered in assemblies rooted in their Islamic faith and cultural traditions to debate, to decide, and to govern together. Despite peaceful means, this community have been endured deportation by USSR in 1944, genocide carried out by Russian government in the 1992, and now till today, constant repressions. Especially in 2018, when Zarifa, a woman with a warm smile and striking round eyes, her dad's favorite child, was detained and taken into a unknown place by the law enforcement, along with 300 other people, more than 6 of which have been persecuted, over 40 of whom have been arrested, with 8 individuals accused of creating and participating in extremist community, including Zarifa.
Wow.
Okay, you might be asking, why those people were persecuted? Well, Ingush people were protesting illegal demarcation of the border between Chechnya and Ingushetia. And you know, from Palestine to Chechnya, land has always been a point of contention. But for Ingushetia, a community of less than 1 million people, and a land already so small that it can fit in the United States over 2,300 times. This illegal closed-door deal was earth-shattering. A university graduate, an Ingush public and political figure, a member of the Ingush Committee of National Unity, and a former deputy of the state institution Memorial Complex to Victims of Repression, Zarifa, now was sentenced to 7.5 years in jail.
Interesting.
What exactly did she do? How did the daughter of a politically repressed nation become a political prisoner herself? What law did she break to earn that dubious title of the first Muslim woman in modern Russian history to be jailed for her views? And perhaps most remarkably, how did she find the love of her life while being behind bars? This is the story of Zarifa Sayotiva and her people, the Ingush people, a community that has endured unimaginable tragedy for generations, yet continues to fight for their identity, their freedom, and their right to exist. Okay, guys, first things first. Who is Zarifa? Well, I will tell you about the baby Zarifa. Zarifa was born on May 1st, 1978, to a family that was repressed in the 1944. Her father grew up in Kazakhstan, where his family was deported. Her father, when his family was deported, he lost his dad at the age of 17 because his dad was killed by the USSR. His mom unfortunately passed away early on in his life as well. So at the age of 17, Zarifa's father became the main breadwinner in the family. What's really upset me personally is that when he was 17 and he was trying to provide for the family, he had multiple siblings to take care of. He went to this place where he wanted to collect some wheat to make food for the family, to make bread for the family. And he was captured by the Russian authorities. What they did is they asked, hey, do you have anything that you can give us? The only thing that he had was a silver belt, a traditional Ingush belt that was given to him by his father. And that was the only thing that he had. And in the moment, he thought, I would rather serve 10 years in jail. Forget about 10 years. I would rather spend the rest of my life in jail than give this belt, the only thing left from my dad, he was killed, than give it away. Unfortunately, in the moment, he had to think about his siblings that he had to come home to and to feed. So that's what he did. He gave away that silver belt. When Zarifa was growing up, she was one of the most favorite kids of her father. Not because he was favoriting people per se, or favoriting kids per se, but because she was a late child. When she was born, he was, I believe, in his late 40s or early 50s. And so for him, it almost like in his old age, he became more soft. He would take her everywhere. He would read her stories before bed. He would tell her things about what happened to them in Kazakhstan after deportation as she grew up. And he even took her to Kazakhstan to find the grave of his mom. And what Zarifa's sisters say is that that was the moment that shaped Zarifa as a person she became today. So much so that when she studied in the university, she picked history as her major. And while she was in her third course in the university, she already taught history to students. When she finished university, she finished it with excellent marks. And right after that, she decided to join a memorial dedicated to the Ingush people who were politically repressed. She began working there, helping out. Eventually, she became the deputy director of that museum. Her activism was not something that she planned to do. Of course, she loved history. She loved telling history to people. But participating in protests, it wasn't always what she felt she wanted to do. It was something she felt that she really needed to do. The government secretly signed a deal, giving away 10% of Ingushetia's land to Chechnya. It wasn't just about borders. It was about betrayal, cutting out the very people whose land this was. Some argue, why fight over land? It's just dirt. Others fiercely disagree and say land is everything. It's the smell of the damp earth after a rainstorm. It's the taste of wild berries plucked from the bushes your grandparents planted. It's the Ingush towers that rise in defiance and the graves where your ancestors rest. It's your memories, after all. And if there was one thing Zarifa was really good at, is keeping memories alive. University graduate, she served as a deputy director of the memorial complex to victims of repressions in Ingushetia. Colleagues and friends describe her as a driving force behind the museum's community engagement initiatives. She created such a vibrant atmosphere that people loved to go and spend time at the museum. When was the last thing you heard someone say, oh, I go to hang out at the museum as a social gathering?
It's been a while.
You never think about museums as a place where you go and you just, hang out with friends.
The only thing I know about is well, now that we talk about it, Art Basel's now in Miami, so I guess folks like to go and gather at galleries and just take little sips of
Yeah.
wine and
Discuss
yeah,
discuss art.
yeah.
I can think, yeah, definitely. That's a really good example. And I think for Zarifa and her people, the museum was their art basel. But instead of discussing stories or discussing paintings, they were discussing stories, stories of their ancestors, stories that were still fresh in their minds. Remember, Zarifa's granddad, was killed in the 1937 because he was defying the government at that moment. So it wasn't, being part of this community wasn't something she always wanted to do, but she always compelled and felt she needed to. So Zarifa's colleagues and friends describe her not just as a driving force behind the museum's initiatives, but also as a motivator, as someone who was full of life and energy. Isabella Ivloeva, who was her very close friend, recalls, and I quote, "She's kind, but she doesn't let people get on her territory," end quote. Her friend and physician Ahmed highlights that her ability to inspire and motivate people was incredible. You would listen to what she said and you would believe her and wanted to do the right thing because she inspired that sense of justice in people. And I think this is generally true when you know about your people's history. Because one thing is to say, oh, I love my culture, or I love our dances or our food. But another thing is to really know what happened to your ancestors and be able to paint a picture to the younger generation who want to be a part of this. And she was able to do that. She had that remarkable ability to really tell things in the way that people felt the history. Because honestly, let's be real, no one likes history. Like when you think about being a kid, going to school and taking a history lesson, do you ever think about this as something interesting or something that you excited to prepare for?
Not at all.
Never, right?
Oh.
Absolutely. So for her, history, it was something that was still alive and real, and it wasn't just on the books. And by the way, she absolutely loved books. Just like Arseny Turbin and Nikita Uvarov, the two teenagers, 14 years old and 15 years old, who received 5 years in Russian jail, the stories I covered in different videos. Zarifa loved to read. She enjoyed books by Jules Verne and Alexander Dumas, and most recently, she revisited The Lord of the Rings and the Harry Potter. I found that really interesting, that she liked those books. She loved literature so much that during her detention, when asked to provide handwriting sample for analysis, Sautieva chose to write a poem instead.
Wow.
In March of 2018, protests were sparked by a controversial border agreement that I mentioned, the border agreement between Chechnya and Ingushetia, in which Chechnya gets 10% of Ingushetia's land. To give you an approximation, that's 64,000 acres. That's roughly the size of Washington, D.C., or about 48,000 football fields. This agreement led to widespread dissatisfaction and later months of demonstrations accompanied by mandatory prayers. So you would see people, I'm going to show you a video on the screen, as they are part of the protests, they're not forgetting the prayers. The authorities refused to listen to citizens' demands. The Ingush people held the World Congress of the Ingush people, and after the discussion, which is an example of democratic procedures, they adopted a resolution calling for the resignation of the head of the republic, amends to the land agreement, the enactment of the law, which is on the rehabilitation of the repressed peoples, and direct elections for the head of the region, as well as changes to the system of election for deputies, parliament, and municipalities. During the March protests, Russian National Guard was deployed. And the reason why the protest even took place is because the initial demands, peaceful demands, were A, not heard at all, no one met with the people, and B, they were instead being threatened that if you continue to ask for what you're asking for, you might even be in danger. As a result, up to 300 people were detained, more than 60 of whom have been prosecuted, over 40 of whom have been arrested, with 8 individuals accused of creating and participating in an extremist community, including Zarifa, who was the only woman detained. I'm going to read to you the official charges for the all 8 detained. First, Ismail Naguiev, 33 years old, was charged with the Part 3 of the Article 33 and Part 2 of the Article 318 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, which is organization of violence dangerous to the life or health of government representatives in connection with the performance of their official duties. He was also charged with the Part 2 of Article 282.1, which is participation in an extremist community. Malgas Uzhakov, he 72 years old. He was charged with Part 3 of Article 33 and Part 2 of the Article 318, which is the same as Ismail. He was also charged with Part 2 of Article 239 of the Criminal Code, which is leadership of a non-profit organization encouraging citizens to refuse to fulfill civil duties or to commit other unlawful acts. And he was charged with Part 1 of Article 282, which is creation of an extremist community punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Next up, Musa Malgasov. He was charged, again, the same article, Part 3, Article 33, and Part 2, Article 318, organization of violence, dangerous to the life of government representatives and law enforcement. Also, Part 1 of Article 282, creation of an extremist community. Person number 4, Pagorov Ahmed, 61 years old. He was charged under the same code of criminal code of Russian Federation, which is Part 3 of Article 33 and Part 2 of Article 318, organization of violence against against the government representatives, and also participation in extremist organization. Person number 5, I know this is a lot of details, but I really want you to grasp the gravity of what took place. Person number 5, Barakh Chemurziev, 55 years old. He was charged under the same Article 33 and Article 318, organization of violence dangerous to the life or health of government representatives. Also, article related to participation in extremist community. Person number 6, Ahmed Barakhoev, age 70 years old. He was charged under the same charges as the previous the previous 5 people, organization of violence, creation of extremist community, and also he was charged on Part 3 of Article 239, which is participation in a non-profit organization whose activities involve encouraging citizens to refuse to fulfill civic duties and commit other unlawful acts. Person number 7, I'm almost done, guys, 2 more people. Hautiev Bagaudin, age 34. Charged under Article 318 and 33, which is the same articles as the previous people. Finally, person number 8, Zarifa Sautieva. Article 33 and Article 318, organization of violence dangerous to the life of government representatives, as well as participation in extremist community. The 2 gentlemen who are 70 and 72 years old, when I saw their photos, that really broke my heart. But I don't want to get emotional because there's still a lot to go over. The court proceedings are a real mystery to me because of the following reasons. First off, when Zarifa and the other people were detained, they were immediately taken to a different state, outside of the place of their registration. So one thing to know about Russia is that propiska, or registration, is super important. It might be the same in Cuba, I'm not sure.
Right. Like a visa, or
It's a bit more complicated than that. For you to be able to work in a given state, unlike in America where you can just have your work permit, the EAD,
Right.
the employment authorization document, in Russia, till today, you have to have a propiska, which is a document that ties you to a certain apartment. Once you have the propiska, you are official a resident of that place. I don't think you can work
interesting.
necessarily, but you need to have it as a first step. Otherwise, you are there illegally. You're not allowed to be in any part of Russia unless you have a propiska in that place.
Wow.
So, if you are, say, from Ingushetia and you have a propiska in Ingushetia, you can work in that state, you get the social benefits, for example, if you're a mother of many kids, and you trialed there.
Right.
Unfortunately, in this case, it's a mystery to me why all of the people who were detained were taken to another state. And the way it happened was they told the families, we're going to take them for an interrogation or just a questioning. and they took them away to another state, a city called Nalchik, for a few days without allowing them to speak to the lawyers.
That's probably why. That's probably why they took him to another state.
They were afraid of something. Like, I don't exactly know the specifics because I don't even have the face of the persecutor. Because none of the families of the victims ever seen him.
Interesting.
The persecutor always sent someone to like an errand guy or like, I don't know, maybe like an assistant or something.
Right.
I don't know what's the official title of this person is, but the persecutor himself, none of the families ever seen him.
Interesting.
Generally speaking, it is so uncommon to take someone from one area of his propiska to another area to be trialed. Not to mention, Ingushetia has a very new CISO. Remember, guys, from previous episodes, I was talking about CISO, the trial detention center. So it wasn't like there is no place to detain these people. There's other reasons why I find the court proceedings from the beginning to the end really strange. No one was allowed to see their family members. The only time they saw their family members was in the courtroom. And the only reason lawyers were allowed to see Zarifa is because she declared that she's not going to eat.
So, like, she went on strike.
She went on a strike. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information as far as the official documents on this case, but I was able to learn more about what was happening inside the courtroom from the testimonies of Zarifa's sisters. One of the things they mentioned was that during the proceedings, the initial hearing, the lawyers deliberated for about 3 hours. There was just a huge, I'm going to show you guys on the screen, a huge panel of lawyers because there was 8 people in one cell detained, 7 men and 1 woman. You need to have a lot of lawyers for that many people. As they were deliberating one after another, giving evidence and giving a lot of very convincing information that there was no real crime committed in that moment. I mean, for Zarifa, for example, she was only live streaming what was happening. She wasn't really inciting violence. She wasn't asking people to do something against the government. I think the only thing that the prosecution really held on to was the fact that while she was live streaming, she briefly mentioned that, guys, if you feel for the cause, you should join us. So that was just a general statement of saying, hey guys, if you feel like this is what you want to be a part of, there was already a lot of people, so there was no need for more people to come. But she was just mentioning to those commenting on the live stream, if you are welcome to join, this is where we are. And I think that's what the prosecutor held on to. That was one of the foundational evidence for her inciting or organizing a violent group or extremist group. She's inviting people to join, and therefore, by default, she's become the leader of them.
Wow.
The logic is not logicking.
Right.
At least in my head. And all the time when I try to cover these stories, I get a severe headache because I don't get it. But I'm trying to be objective at the same time. Now, as I mentioned, the prosecutor, we don't know what he looks like, but we do know that they only deliberated for about 5 to 10 minutes. And the verdict was issued. So I want to read to you, because honestly, I wish I had more information about like who said what took place, how many hearings it was. I think that information is not, there is no substantial documents to assign to it or apply to it. Because all we know is that at the end, the 8 people got really terrible sentences. Ismail, who is 33 years old, 8 years in jail. Malgas Uzhakov, 72 years, 9 years in jail. Damn, he will be 81.
Crazy. It's tough.
Musa Malgasov, 52 years old, he received 9 years in jail. Pogorov Ahmed received... Pogorov Ahmed, this is interesting. Initially, he ran away. He was able to do so. Then later, the police detained him. So I don't know exactly what they sentenced him to as far as like, the official verdict.
Probably worse.
Probably.
Yeah, because, I mean, running away is... You're fleeing.
Yeah. in addition to what was his official charge? Participation in extremist community and organization of violence against the government representatives. So, but I do know Barach Chemurziyev, who, by the way, one thing I didn't mention, all of these people are university graduates. Two of these men, I don't recall the exact names right now, they studied in St. Petersburg and Moscow. They had successful businesses there.
Wow.
They are all married, by the way, at least 3 kids each. And a lot of them, at least 2 I know, out of 8, left their successful businesses to go back home to serve the community.
Wow.
So Bahar Chemurziyev, who received 8 years in jail, Ahmed Barakhoev, 9 years in jail, Hauti Pagaudin, 8 years in jail, and that's it.
Wow.
Zarifa has endured horrific conditions in prison. She described overcrowded cells, no access to basic necessities, and a justice system designed to break people. Let me tell you, in her own words, what the life has been behind bars. We were 12 people, crammed into a 28 square meter cell. There was no hot water, no refrigerator, and cockroaches crawled freely over everything, including children, end quote. Why she said children? Some of the women detained are there with their infant babies.
Wow.
And there was a particular woman, and I appreciate Zarifa for telling us about her in her final words in court. And I think that is a remarkable thing, as she knows she's going to be sentenced to 7.5 years. She, in one of the hearings, she mentioned this woman who had, I believe, 7-8 months baby. There was no carpet for the baby to learn how to crawl. It was a concrete. It was very cold. There was no necessities. There was no hot water. And when they complained, this is something I want to really make a point. People might say, why aren't they complaining? Why aren't they saying, oh, this and this happened to us? Because after all, we don't know about the conditions unless they tell us. When she told what was happening in the cell and asked for some necessities, what happened was the only kettle that they had to warm up the water, that was taken away from them. Why? Because the capacity of that kettle considered to be outside of the regulations. It was too big. Excuse me, not too big. It was too strong. Like the voltage, I guess, was a safety hazard.
Wow.
One good thing came out of complaining, though, in another instance, was when she said, look, the baby is about to be 1. She needs to learn how to walk. She needs to learn how to crawl. We need a carpet. We need some things in this cell. The keepers of the jail said, okay, we will give you permission. You can buy everything yourself. And so they collected the money from the community and they were able to provide something for the baby. Despite all of this, Zarifa remains unbroken and she expresses gratitude to her supporters. I want to say in her own words what she wants people to know. I quote, "To all of those who prayed for me, those letters that you sent to me, and the people that stood by me, I thank you. Your solidarity gives me hope in this darkness," end quote. Thank you guys for watching this episode of Sunday in Russia. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to support the family of Zarifa and all of those who were persecuted and unjustly put in jail, I will leave instructions in the description on how to do that. You can financially support them or you can write them a letter. I'm sure they will appreciate that very much. Thank you.